The year was 1347. Europe was thriving. Markets bustled with merchants, cathedrals soared toward heaven, and the population had never been higher. But from the east, death was coming. A silent, invisible killer that would transform European civilization forever. This is the story of the Black Death, the most devastating pandemic in human history. In just 5 years, it would kill between 75 and 200 million people, wiping out 30 to 60% of Europe's population. But death was only the beginning of the story. Our story begins in 1346 in the bustling port city of Kaffa on the Black Sea, modern-day Feodosia in Crimea. Mongol forces had been besieging this Genoese trading post for months when something unexpected happened. The besiegers began dying of a mysterious disease. According to chroniclers, the desperate Mongols catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls, perhaps history's first recorded use of biological warfare. The surviving Italian merchants fled by ship, unknowingly carrying death itself in their cargo holds. These ships carried more than silk and spices. Hidden in their grain stores were black rats, and in those rats lived fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague. As these ships docked in Constantinople, Genoa, Venice, and other Mediterranean ports, they unleashed hell upon Europe. The plague spread with terrifying speed. Sicily fell in October 1347. By early 1348, it had reached mainland Italy, southern France, and Spain. The medieval world's extensive trade networks, once a source of prosperity, became highways of death. The symptoms were horrific. Victims developed painful swellings called buboes in their groin, armpits, and neck. Black spots appeared on the skin. Death often came within days, sometimes hours. No one understood what was happening or how to stop it. Medieval Europe was perfectly positioned for catastrophe. Cities were overcrowded and unsanitary. People lived in close quarters with animals. Most had never bathed regularly. The population had grown dramatically in the previous centuries, putting pressure on food supplies. The plague followed trade routes with mathematical precision. From Italy, it spread north through the Alps into Germany and Austria. Ships carried it to England in the summer of 1348, where it was called the Great Mortality. By 1349, it had reached Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. The death toll was staggering. London lost over half its population. Paris buried 500 people daily at the height of the epidemic. Entire villages were abandoned. In some regions, 90% of the population perished. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of absolute terror. Giovanni Boccaccio wrote from Florence, "How many valiant men, how many fair ladies, breakfast with their kinfolk and the same night supped with their ancestors in the next world." Society began to break down. Some turned to extreme religious devotion, believing the plague was God's punishment. Groups of flagellants wandered Europe, publicly whipping themselves. Others sought scapegoats. Jewish communities faced horrific persecution, with entire populations massacred in cities like Strasbourg and Mainz. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Trade collapsed. Agricultural production plummeted as farmers died or fled. Entire craft guilds were wiped out. The medieval economy, built on a delicate balance of agriculture and commerce, teetered on the edge of total collapse. But Europe didn't just survive the Black Death, it was transformed by it. The massive population decline created a labor shortage that would reshape society forever. Before the plague, Europe was a land of surplus labor. Peasants were tied to the land through feudalism, working their lords' estates for subsistence wages. But when half the workforce died, the survivors suddenly had power. Peasants began demanding higher wages, better working conditions, and freedom to move between employers. The rigid feudal system that had dominated Europe for centuries began to crack. Lords who had once commanded absolute obedience now found themselves negotiating with their workers. In cities, skilled craftsmen could name their price. Apprentices became masters overnight. The surviving artisans formed stronger guilds and demanded political representation. The middle class, barely existent before the plague, began to emerge as a political force. Women's roles expanded dramatically. With so many men dead, women took over businesses, entered trades previously closed to them, and gained property rights. Some historians argue that the plague marked the beginning of women's gradual emergence from medieval subordination. The plague also sparked medical innovation. Physicians began to question ancient Greek and Roman medical texts. The first public health measures were implemented: quarantine laws, hospital systems, and sanitation regulations. The University of Prague established one of Europe's first medical schools in 1348. Perhaps most surprisingly, the plague may have helped spark the Renaissance. The concentration of wealth among survivors funded artistic patronage. The psychological impact of mass death led to new philosophical and artistic expressions. The medieval certainty about divine order was shattered, making room for humanistic thinking. The social changes unleashed by the plague didn't happen peacefully. As the immediate crisis passed, nobles and merchants tried to roll back the gains made by workers and peasants. The result was a series of violent uprisings that shook Europe to its foundations. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 saw thousands of workers march on London, demanding an end to serfdom and reduced taxes. Led by figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball, they temporarily took control of the capital before being brutally suppressed. France experienced the Jacquerie Rebellion in 1358, while similar uprisings occurred in Flanders, Italy, and the German states. Though most were crushed, they sent a clear message: the old order was dying along with the plague's victims. These revolts forced concessions from the ruling classes. Serfdom began its slow decline across Western Europe. Representative assemblies gained power as rulers needed to negotiate with their subjects rather than simply command them. By 1400, Europe had fundamentally changed. The rigid hierarchies of medieval feudalism were giving way to more fluid social structures. The seeds of capitalism were planted in the new labor markets created by the plague. Banking families like the Medici rose to prominence, financing the recovery and expansion of European trade. The accumulation of wealth in fewer hands provided capital for investment in new technologies and exploration. The demographic pressure that had constrained medieval Europe was gone. The survivors looked outward, launching the age of exploration that would reshape the world. The same ships that once brought death now carried European influence to distant continents. The intellectual changes were equally profound. The plague had shattered faith in traditional authorities, religious, medical, and political. This skepticism fueled the scientific revolution and the Protestant Reformation. The medieval worldview gave way to modernity. The Black Death was undoubtedly one of history's greatest catastrophes. It brought unimaginable suffering to millions of people across Europe and beyond. But from this tragedy emerged the foundations of the modern world. The labor rights we take for granted, the medical systems that protect us, the democratic institutions that represent us, all have roots in the social transformation that followed the plague. The Black Death didn't just change Europe's population, it changed the very idea of what Europe could be. The plague taught Europe that even the most established orders could crumble overnight. But it also showed that from the ashes of destruction, new and better societies could emerge. In the end, the Black Death didn't just kill medieval Europe, it gave birth to the modern world.